It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today. So Wivine Teuling is an Agile Tester at Triodos Bank in the Netherlands. Wivine started as a trainee to become a developer, only to be quickly discovered as a real tester. And so for the past 4 years, she's been working at Triodos Bank, and most of that time was spent on mobile, the mobile banking app. That's from laying the groundwork, excuse me, for automated UI and API tests to working on proof of concepts for visual regression testing. And then Guido Vermeulen, he's the release manager and test process improvement manager, also at Triodos Bank. So Guido worked for many different projects, small, big, agile, waterfall, and this makes him a versatile test specialist who always tries to translate experiences from one project to another. And his latest challenge is the release coordination of the Triodos mobile banking app in parallel with continuously improving quality processes for the development and testing of the application. So Wivine, Guido, on behalf of Source Labs and the attendees here today, thank you for joining us for this Test Automation Day and for sharing your journeys and experiences with you all. So I'll stop sharing now and pass over to you.
Thanks, Matthew, for having us here. And right, so my name is Guido Vermeulen. I'm consultant at Navarra, and for the past 3 years, I've been working at the Triodos Bank. I started out as one of the test engineers in a Scrum team, and later on got the role as a release coordinator for the mobile banking app. And next to that, I was responsible for the quality process improvement of the mobile banking app and internet banking, our website. Looking at me personally, I'm also owner and founder of a brewery, Brouwerij Klein Zwitserland. I like to travel, I like to hike, for example in Sweden or Scotland, very nice countries. We have a dog, and in my spare time I like to do sports, mainly water polo, and of course I look exactly like this in this picture.
Hello everyone, I'm Wivine. I work as an Agile Tester at Triodos Bank. Most of the time I've worked there I was spent working on the mobile banking app. A lot of it also on the test automation for that, and for the last something about a year we've been working on the new internet banking. A bit about myself, all the food or photos I've taken of actually food I made myself. I love a good game of old-fashioned tabletop role-playing, and I have 2 cats that I absolutely adore. I mean, look at them, they're adorable. And I have a bunch of other hobbies, but you know, I have to fit something on one slide. A bit about Triodos Bank. I know that the term an ethical bank can still sort of lead to raised eyebrows, but they do exist, and we're one of them. Triodos Bank was founded on the conviction that banking can also be a powerful force for good, and our mission is to make money work for positive social, environmental, and also cultural changes. So there's definitely a qualitative aspect also to the investments we make and the loans we provide, and it's not just about making money and about numbers, and we really only finance sustainable enterprises. And transparency is also something that's really important at Triodos Bank, and this is something that you also really feel in working there day to day, even in the coffee and tea that's provided in the office pantries, for example. And it's not only about financing change, it's also about changing finance. There's a lot of people also working on influencing the banking sector, both on a national and on a global level. If you'd like to know more about Triodos, there's a lot about our story and our mission and our organization at the website. One more thing to mention, we're a European bank founded in the Netherlands. Our head office is also in the Netherlands. That's where both Guido and I work. And we have banking activities, of course, in the Netherlands, also in Belgium, in the United Kingdom, in Spain, in Germany, and in France. And we work in domains. I myself work in the domain payments and savings, and Guido works in onboarding and services. His domain makes sure that a customer can actually open an account, and once that account is operational, that's where it becomes the business of my domain. Unless it's an investment account, for example, or a loan, those are covered by different domains. So what are we going to talk to you today? Give you a quick overview of the applications involved. We'll look back at the hurdles we've taken or sometimes maybe crashed into. And we'll look at where we're at, and then we'll look forward to the future. And of course, we want to leave plenty of time for questions. So these are the applications concerned, our mobile banking app and our internet banking application. For today's talk, we will focus mostly on the mobile banking app. This is an app. There's actually 3 different apps for the UK, for the Netherlands, and for Belgium. And for Belgium, that's also in 2 different languages. You may notice that the look and feel of the internet banking and the mobile banking is quite different. We're working on that to make it look like this, and that's still ongoing. Once this is operational, those 2 applications will talk to the same API layer that I haven't pictured here. What are we using for those 2 applications? The app, a mobile app, is written in NativeScript with the NativeScript framework, and our new internet banking will be written with Angular. I've also included the test frameworks that we use. So looking back, about a year and a half ago, we were working on a mobile banking app, developing a lot of new functionality with 4 teams. We had a pretty decent test coverage. We had unit tests both in the front end and in the back end. We had a really pretty suite of API tests for our API layer, and we had a bunch of user interface tests, but we were also doing quite a lot of manual regression tests for each release. So of course, there were some things missing. One of that was we didn't really have a fast feedback loop. The part of that was caused by the fact that we were just outgrowing our resources. The build machines and that also had to run the tests were really silting up. We had more tests, so we had more maintenance to do on those tests. And our suite was growing rapidly, which usually involves more maintenance. So tests would not be available because we had to do maintenance, or they would not be reliable because they needed to be maintained. And sometimes also really not helping in our feedback loop was that we would find issues sort of by accident, really relying on also the sharp eye of everyone involved to discover mainly visual regression, but also just general issues. Most of it we would find, but then you get results at sort of random intervals and you get into trouble when trying to do a root cause analysis, because your first question is, how long has this been in there, or when was this caused? And there would just be no quick or easy way to find out, or the only answer I could give would be, first one to find out wins, or I'll give you a cookie when you tell me. So another thing we were really missing was scalability. As I said, we were building more tests, and that really turned our build and our test machines into a bottleneck where we just have to wait a very long time. And we were also just doing more work and not focusing enough probably on doing the right work. And we would just keep piling on in the manual regression testing that was really very obviously not scalable. Another thing was just things that we were missing were the devices. We could only offer a limited support in terms of device because we could only support devices that we actually in Triodos physically owned. We did regularly review our device stack. We would buy new devices or upgrade when needed, but of course this is very limited. And in one extreme case, we actually had to buy a specific device for an issue. We have a device that's now sort of legendary or infamous. It was a budget Android device with the least reliable key store we could find, because it's easy to troubleshoot something if it easily gets you into trouble. We were also missing bugs, unfortunately. So I have a couple of beautiful examples for you on bugs that we some of them we really missed, some of them we found just in the nick of time. This one we unfortunately really missed, even though our automated test had actually found it. It turned into a classic case of blame the test and not the app. So unfortunately this did get to production. So yeah, I'm slightly embarrassing myself here, so I can only recommend that you do as we say and not as we did. Another one we did find, but just in time before the release. I'm wondering if you've already spotted it. There's an X to dismiss the model. And we had an automated test for this to check that it would open and close. And it did work, just not if you rely on your site. So that's not very useful. But as I said, we fixed that. This one, also personal favorite of mine. I think of this as if it would have happened in Star Trek, it would be, the cause would be reverse the polarity of the graphical matrix or something. The menu here should be at the bottom. Of course, also the screen shouldn't be blank. As I said, this is just one of the moments I find really funny. And of course, even though it may be slightly embarrassing too, I think joy shared is also multiplied. Another big one is that our app would crash. And for a moment there, it would happen quite often. And of course, that's never great. But in this case, it had a little sort of extra bonus defect in that the way this was phrased would cause some customers to think that Triodos Bank had actually quit altogether and not just our mobile app. So we had some worried calls about this. Luckily, we did manage to stop the app crashing eventually. So that's the good news. Of course, as I said, we were missing a couple things, so we took action. What we did is we introduced a retry mechanism because we thought our tests were flaky. Turned out our app was flaky too. So a rerun would actually start to hide. This would actually start to hide our issues. And we were no longer finding false positives, but now we had false negatives, which isn't great either. Another thing we did is just we're getting into trouble with our resources, so we just increased our resources. We added more hardware. We went from 2 to 4 to 6 Mac Minis, and that really decreased our build time because on the separate machines we could run in parallel. It isn't everything, but sometimes it's just that simple. And at that time it really did help us a lot. What we also did was increase cooperation and a sense of shared responsibility. To foster the sense of shared responsibility, for instance, we simply hung up a dashboard in a place where you couldn't miss it, and we really noticed that everyone would start looking at it and feel more responsible for a broken test. And we also got our developers involved, both in just writing tests, where we had one we could easily convince to start writing tests, and then you see that the rest would also start to follow. And we had also one developer in particular who really worked on improving our test suite and who built extensions, for example, to dry off our test code where we could write one test and run it for all 3 apps. And we also started to work smarter first and harder only if needed. And we really focused on taking a risk-based approach. For example, writing tests for our known defect clusters. After a while, you know where the defect cluster in your app, and we would focus less on less troublesome areas. And after a while, it turned out that this was something that not all of our developers also knew about. What is risk-based testing? So we also educated them a little about that because they asked. And then there were also challenges, and this is where Guido will explain to you.
Thanks, Wivine. Well, as Wivine already mentioned, we did quite some actions to overcome our challenges, but we still had some remaining ones. Although we scaled to fit the situation, we already knew that that was not fit for the future. At some point, we would just run into the same problem again, and we would just have to add more hardware. But that's not a scalable way of working. We would have to maintain those machines and do a lot of work to configure them. So it's just not scalable if you keep having the same amount of teams and the same amount of developers, while the business has great ambition to add even more features to your applications. Next to that, Wivine already mentioned that we were finding more and more bugs due to a good coverage, but we were still finding them in a rather late stage. and that caused a lot of overhead between the teams because the root cause analysis was often difficult to establish. We are working in different domains, so different teams are responsible for different features within the applications. That could mean that if we suspect a bug in one feature, we would go to that team and ask them to resolve that. But then it turned out to be a root cause in another domain. So that would go over and forth, causing a lot of overhead between teams. Next to that, we felt that the teams were missing the right tooling to represent our customers. The device range of our customers is ever evolving, so our device range that we use should be updated continuously. But we had to maintain those devices that we have all the time and continuously keep looking for new devices that are representing our customers. Next to that, we were starting to work on the new internet banking, where we needed different browsers, different browser versions to be tested for that website as well. And we didn't have the proper tooling for that. Last but not least is the performance testing. We already ran into a couple of performance issues, and well, we fixed them and did some performance testing for that to see that we actually fixed it. But we never created a structural way of testing the performance during our application lifecycle. So how are we going to face those challenges? In general, we would need a shift left. And I think most of you have already seen a picture like this and understand the concept of the picture. So what you can see on the horizontal axis is are the different phases of the application lifecycle, from coding to a release. And in the red line, you can see the amount of time and cost that you have to spend on fixing a bug, finding it in a certain phase in your application lifecycle. So we were at finding a lot of bugs just before the release, and you can see that time and costs are increasing exponentially when you find bugs there. So in general, we wanted to make sure that we shift left as much as possible. So how are we going to make that work? So one very straightforward thing is, of course, automate all the manual processes that you have, or at least as much as possible. Manual processes are error prone for human error and boring to do, and you don't want to do that over and over again. So automate manual release processes, automate manual checks like end-to-end tests, like visual tests, like browser tests. That's pretty straightforward. But how are we going to do that if we're just going to expand the number of tests? We also need to test in an efficient way to keep it maintainable. And for that, we need clear goals for each test that we're executing and test in the earliest phase possible during the development. In that way, we can get the teams in control of their code. Then the idea would be to find a good strategy to get to that efficient testing, of course. So a good basis for that is the test pyramid. And you can see here the test pyramid that we had more or less 1.5 years ago. We had a broad basis of unit testing. We had our end-to-end testing on top of that, and we had some manual testing for each release as well. But what was happening in our end-to-end testing is that we were mixing up goals. Simply because we didn't want to do a lot of manual testing, we were adding assertions in tests. For example, a payment happy flow. We would navigate to a payment page where we would insert the mandatory information to make a payment for a happy flow. But also on that page was, for example, an element for a gift payment or a QR code. And we would do an assertion on those elements as well, simply because we were on that page. And otherwise, we would have to do it manually. So we preferred to do it with an automated assertion. So that was fine in the beginning. But then when we expanded our test suite and wrote more of those tests, we noticed that tests were failing because something was broken, but not in scope of that test. So for example, in our payment happy flow, the gift element could be broken while our happy flow for our payment was working perfectly fine. But our test failed and we still didn't know if our payment happy flow was actually working. So a lot of maintenance, a lot of time spent on the analysis of those tests, and we felt like we needed something in between there to fix that. So we introduced a visual UI testing layer. In this way, we could separate the goals of the testing that we did into clear visual testing, testing the layout of a page, testing that all the elements are there and in the correct position. For the end-to-end test, we could strip those extra assertions that we did, making our end-to-end test smaller and more focused on actually testing whether our app is integrating well with our live backend. So rendering the information coming from the backend in the UI. Our test suite was getting smaller and executed more fast. We needed to provide our team with the tooling to do so. So we needed something for visual regression testing. We needed something to run those visual regression tests on to represent our customers. And all of that needed to be working in a scalable way. So we found the answer in these two tools, Applitools for visual regression testing and Sauce Labs providing us with a wide range of devices and browsers to test on for the stuff that matters for our customers. Next to that, Sauce Labs is providing us with a way of executing our tests in a scalable way. Laszlo already mentioned parallel execution and the easy ability to scale up in your concurrent sessions. Finding these tools didn't happen overnight. Last year, I think somewhere around March, we started with the search for a solution. And since we're in the financial sector, in a bank specifically, we needed to take into account a lot of factors before we could actually acquire such a tool. So we assembled a assessment team, which involved, of course, developers and testers, IT management, architects, risk department, security department, vendor management, and all of those together should decide upon, agree upon a vendor that's appropriate for us to use. As a development team, we made a short list of vendors that could possibly help us with that. With the assessment team, we narrowed that down to two vendors, Applitools and Sauce Labs. We noticed that not one of the vendors could provide us with a total solution to tackle all of the challenges, but Applitools and Sauce Labs combined could possibly bring us there. So last year we did a proof of concept with Applitools. We started out with Applitools. For those who don't know Applitools, Applitools is a platform that has smart algorithms to do image comparison and a nice interface to do analysis on your tests and possible differences in the test results. And what we noticed, what we really liked about Applitools is that there were hardly any false positives, which we were really afraid of looking at pixel by pixel comparison, but that was not the case with Applitools. Next to that, also the analysis of the tests was very efficient. For example, you could find a bug that was persistent throughout several pages in your app, and Applitools would recognize that that is the same difference over those pages. And you could, with one click, accept that as a new update of your app or mark that as a bug. So that's very efficient in the analysis. Beginning of this year, we started with Sauce Labs with the proof of concept of that. We only had 1 week with the team to do the proof of concept. We thought it was pretty short in time, but that's all we got. So we started off with an on-site training with Sauce Labs. And actually within the first 2 days, we already got 90% of our assessment criteria covered. So that was really powerful. Next to that, we saw that Sauce Labs was actively developing more features within their platform, which were promising for future use for ourselves as well. Is that all that we're going to do? At this point, we're having our infrastructure set up for Sauce Labs testing, having a connection to our local environment, having a connection to our team and acceptance environment. Starting to write our automated tests using Sauce Labs, and in the coming year we're evaluating our number of concurrent sessions to scale up even more. We're planning on using test insights. We used that in the past, and Laszlo already demoed that in the previous presentation, and we were really interested in having that done in an automated way. We've done that manually. It's very tedious but very powerful. So if it can be done in an automated way, that's great. So another big change that's coming up for us is that Wivine mentioned that we were having our app created in native script across platform framework, but we're now actually going to switch to native. So that's a huge change. We're going to need to have a lot of work done, migrating all our tests, migrating all our code. So it's a nice challenge for the upcoming time. And what I didn't mention in the previous slides is the performance testing. That is still something that needs to be addressed. And that's definitely something that we're going to pick up in the coming year. And we already saw that Sauce Labs and with going native can really help us in picking that up as well. And in the end, of course, we're ever going to shift left even more, because we just want to make sure that we're ahead of the curve and not run into these hurdles again. So with that, I'd like to give you a conclusion or a takeaway message. What we see is that sometimes you run into issues, and you're probably not the only one in your team running into those issues. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and take a look at the bigger picture to see what is going wrong. Because it might very well be that other teams are running into the same problem, and that the processes that you have in place are just simply not up to date anymore for the situation that you're in. So taking a look at the bigger picture really helps you. And also that is going to help you in identifying the upcoming hurdles in an early stage. Try to make sure that you identify them before you actually run into them big time. And convince your team, of course, convince your product owners, convince your management that these hurdles are coming up, and if possible, already provide them with a possible solution. That is really going to help you identify those hurdles.
What could possibly also help you in identifying some of those hurdles you are facing is what you need for that is really to trust your tests. And as I mentioned, in one instance we fell for the classic blame the test defense, and that's something that we just learned that you should never fall for. Even if that might be the case, at least look into it with your team. If it is your test and you want to know, and if it is in fact an issue with your app, then you really don't want to find out later. The moment you start running your tests, you should really start trusting them, because if you don't trust the tests you run, then why are you running them at all? Another thing that comes with that is that sort of the tester's intuition. Also with our white screen issue, there was a tester's intuition, that someone who said, I don't know, I think there's something wrong, but we did, we overruled ourselves with thinking it was probably a test issue. Even though that intuition does not have an explicit argumentation behind it, it is supported by a lot of implicit knowledge and by experience to back it up. So really trust that gut. If that will really help you. As I said before, I'm willing to slightly embarrass myself here, showing you all these horrible bugs that we had, and that's so that you don't have to. So really take that into account, please.
Right, Vivina, that fits perfectly with the next point. Learn from your peers. I mean, presentations like these, conferences, meetups, knowledge sessions are really going to help you identify all the problems that you might run into or might have already run into. And I would encourage you to attend all of these sessions and learn from them, because there are a lot of colleagues there, peers there, that are in a similar organization, similar application, that are facing the same problems. So learn from them well, that's going to help you a lot in identifying those hurdles.
Yes, and as I think we've also shown, and as you will see, I think time and time again, when you listen to your peers, when you learn from your peers, is that when you want to shift left, it's not just all about the tools. As someone put it very beautifully, a fool with a tool is still a fool. You also need to work on your process, on your communication, on cooperation, on shared responsibility. And that means that even if it's not yet possible for you to get your hands on a certain tool, that you can still improve your process. Combining the two is obviously, it works best, but it's really important to do what you do best and think what for you is the most useful way to spend your time and to use your effort, your input. Now that was our takeaway message, and that means that we now have room, and I don't know, I'm not certain if you time because I see that it's already 5 past, but we are still willing to answer questions, and we both will also be available on Slack. So
Exactly.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you to you both. That was a fantastic presentation. Really interesting to see the challenges that you wrestled with. Thank you for your candor, your honesty. It's always great when people do share those experiences. And I liked at the end there where you're kind of encouraging people to do that. And I think you set a great example with what you were sharing and some of those things that you went through there. So really appreciate that. I think because of time, what we'll probably do is ask, because you're both in the Slack channel, as you both said, we'll probably ask people to ask their questions in there. I had one question as well, which kind of relates to one of the things you had in there as well. But Guido, when you put up the slide, you had, well, one of the last slides, you had a lot of teams that you needed to interact with there. How difficult was it to bring people on the same journey that you were on? Because one of the things that we hear a lot from this community is you understand the importance of it, but how do you get other people to understand the importance of what you're trying to do as well? So it's a question to you both.
Yeah, I think that's the assessment team that we mentioned here.
Yeah.
A lot of different departments. Well, Guido had the most to do with that, and did the most to actually wrangle all those people together. So I'll let him answer this one.
Right. Thanks, Wivine. Yeah, indeed. It might be challenging to get all of those people together and have them work together, because often in organizations like these, there are totally different departments with different goals and different day-to-day work. And they might not be working with you and struggling with you in the same day-to-day process. So I started out doing this, and I discussed a lot of these challenges with my teammates and with the product owner management there. That was my first start. And when I convinced them that we had a just cause to go for, they said, okay, go ahead, go for it. And we started to assemble the team, and of course that needed a lot of discussion to explain what the goal was, what the challenges were, and get them all on the same page.
Right.
It might take you a while, but I would definitely say to everyone, just go for it. And although it might take you a lot of effort, in the end it's going to be really worth your while.
And what I also remember, what I also remember is probably like with the developers, just very short addition, is that you can always start with one. Try to convince someone who's then on your team and who will help you push it further into the organization.
Definitely, yeah. Usually you have like an ignition team that is enthusiastic about your idea and can really help you put forth those ideas and spread them with the rest of the teams as well.
Brilliant. Look, thank you both again. It was fantastic. Because of time, what I'll do is I'll just ask that if there are any other questions, because you're both in the Slack channel, as you mentioned, people can post their questions there.